Hello and welcome to CWSI's industry panel discussion on compliance and productivity when trading from home, the third webinar in a series on secure remote working. Our host, CWSI, are a Dublin headquartered mobility consultancy offering many services, professional services and training to many respected organisations across a wide range of industry and public sectors. They are the remote working experts who know exactly how to create remote working processes to help firms deliver productivity, security, and compliance. This webinar is being recorded and you can enter any questions you have into the chat panel on the right. So first off, some introductions. I'm Mike Wilson. I'm CEO and founder of Ditto, and I have the pleasure of moderating today's session. And so notes on Ditto, founded in 2008, we're a marketing and business development practice focused on technology, with offices in London and Dublin. Today, I'm joined by Tom Kennedy, Mobile and Security Solutions Sales Professional at CWSI, Andy Faulknell, Customer Success Director at Movius, and Paul Connaughty, Head of Consulting at CWSI. Good afternoon, gentlemen. How are you?
Great, thanks, Mike.
Good, thanks, Mike.
Pretty good. So I know it's a real true wonder of the modern age. We're all in different parts of the country and different countries of tuning in for this, as is our audience. So listen, to kick off, let me give some words of introduction on our panel members. So Tom is an experienced leader working in the technology industry, skilled in business development, large account management, telecoms, contact center, cybersecurity, unified endpoint management, and Microsoft technology. He's a qualified solicitor turned sales professional with a deep curiosity and love of technology. At CWSI, we specialize enterprise mobility and mobile security, helping our customers design and manage secure mobility solutions all over the world. Alongside Tom, we have Andy Faulknell. He currently serves as Client Success Director at Movius, and he is an experienced global product manager and an industry veteran within the financial markets. Prior to Movius, Andy spent 25 years at HSBC, where he was the global product manager for the trading floor technologies. When Andy's not working, he enjoys cycling, listening to music, traveling, and spending quality time with his family. Just obeying all the social distancing stuff, though, Andy would have sure do. And then alongside, and finally, Paul. Paul leads the enterprise mobile consultancy arm of CWSI, which provides strategic and tactical advisory services for public and private sector organisations in Ireland and the UK, as well as several multinationals, specialising in security, governance, and business innovation while using mobile technologies, and he's got over 16 years experience in ICT and security roles. Paul has a strong technical IT architecture and administration background with over a decade as senior systems engineer administrator roles in the telecom sector. Paul then combined his technical role with 4 years as country security lead for UPC Ireland, now Virgin Media Ireland, as part of the Pan-European Liberty Global Security Team. So good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be moderating today, and thank you for taking part. So how are we all feeling today? How are we all handling the kind of locked up situation and getting our hour a day outside?
Well, it's certainly easier with all the sunshine, Mike.
Do you know, isn't it just, you know, yeah, I'm a father of 3 boys, and all the lads are home at the moment. And do you know what? It's definitely pushing the limits. I didn't know the Scrabble could become a contact sport. So it's
yeah, managing a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old here in Dublin, Mike, and I can say you may hear them in the background. And apologies if you do.
Yeah, listen, I want to say to all our, and I'm sure all our audience in the stream, to you, listen, folks, you might hear some background noises. ISPs can dip and drop on the internet, so I'm sure everyone will kind of ride us with the bumps and the waves as we go through this, because it is a very important thing we're touching on today. We are working through unprecedented times, and there are stuff we're going to cover today, which I know our audience will want to tune into to understand both what remote working is like, but particularly today we're going to be looking at regulated firms and compliance. So let me explain how the form is going to work. I'm going to give a short overview of the topic. The panelists will then give their insights, just how the world has changed so dramatically, that unprecedented we're working through. We've got a set of questions that we've prepared in advance today, and we shared with the panel that we're going to chat through. We'll have some time for audience questions. So if you do have one, please submit them in the box on the right, and then we'll sum up with some closing comments each. So, okay, some opening sentences for myself and kind of set the scene. I think we're focusing today looking at those type of firms that are maybe financial or regulated or have a compliance issue. So, when you bill your time in minutes, a poor customer experience can set you back years. And for regulated industries where time is money, a key challenge during their working from home period is achieving compliance quickly so staff can meet the needs of clients without delay. Another major challenge, I think, is making sure that achieving compliance for remote workers doesn't create a barrier to their productivity or to their well-being doing the job. So the user experience needs to be as smooth as it can possibly be for traders and folk working in that domain to act swiftly on real-time information. And it is no wonder really that IT teams have their hands full for solutions to all of these problems, and even just internet service providers keeping the internet up has been a hell of a challenge. So I'm absolutely thrilled that we've got experts from Movius and CWSI exploring this today and sharing their insights with our audience. So folk, to kick off, I mean, our first question here is, in your view, how has the world changed for businesses and organizations since the COVID outbreak? I mean, that might be kind of stating the obvious, but really, it's fantastic to get both CWSI and Movius work in the business of helping clients B2B. And so it's keen just to get from your perspective for your own companies, and then for the companies you serve, how has the world changed since the COVID outbreak? What's been happening? And Tom, I'll start with you from your perspective, please.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And firstly, thanks a million for hosting today. Looking forward to an engaging session with the panel. To your question there, I mean, look, where do we start? This is it's a fundamental change to everything we do. I think we'll have to refer to everything before 2020 as BC before COVID. Really, in my view, it's really the Industrial Revolution was the last time something happened that's such a transformation. Since that time, people have been getting out of bed to go to work and put in their 8-hour shift. But I suppose with this forced adoption of remote working, for the first time really in modern history, our work and our home lives are now inextricably linked. And I think that this presents immediate challenges in the short term to everybody as we all react. But I think, interestingly, there's going to be a lot of long-term benefits to it. So it could be a catalyst to drive a lot of change that people have been waiting for and looking for the time and the inclination to do. I think the shift will allow our employees to get their work done, but also to manage their lives in a different way. But I suppose that change in terms of management requires trust from the business. I think organizations that trust their employees will have no difficulty as they move towards that kind of remote working new normal. But if you're a clock watcher, then I can only imagine how difficult this period of time is going to be for you. And obviously, look, back to your original question, this has wide-reaching consequences for business in terms of productivity, security, recruitment, employee well-being, and obviously, really importantly, what we're here to talk about mostly today in the space of compliance.
No, fantastic. I'm busy taking notes here too. Yeah, I mean, it is. Has the world changed business organizations since the COVID outbreak? I think yes. I maybe calls it a kind of new normal, but there's something completely abnormal about it. And Andy, just moving to yourself from sharing with us from a Movius perspective, how's the world changed for your firm, and how's the world changed for the companies that you're serving during this COVID outbreak?
Oh, great question. Yeah, thanks, Mike. And so from Movius's perspective, we provide a service that enables individuals to stay compliant in the remote location. So as you can imagine from a statement like that we've been busy over the last few weeks and months, just trying to help those organisations that didn't have those kind of plans in place, or not expecting to have those plans in place, or not expecting to have to execute. All of a sudden, we're going to work with them to make sure that they can effectively transform their working day to a home location, at the same time staying compliant. So yeah, we've been extremely busy there from that perspective. And in answer to the question that was posed to us all, how has the world changed? I think a lot of organisations, and obviously the one that was close to my heart before I left back at HSBC for such a long time there, most areas I think in that organisation would have had a plan and an already transformed digital mobile working from home platform, process, call it whatever you like. But when you move into the compliance space, that certainly wasn't the case. It was something that I really worked hard with the business, the frontline business, to try and implement, but there was a real difficulty there to see how we can get a typical trading day to move to home. It's now happening. So these things all sort of kind of happen fast, and Yeah, so the world's changed in a huge way into those areas that never had the capability to be home working, that suddenly are and suddenly have to be.
Yeah, I just really, I'm going to turn back again and draw on your HSBC experience and Andy. And I think turning to Paul, you sit down and do strategy, Paul, and you sit down and do consulting. And I think a lot of firms prepared for, okay, what happens if a part of their business goes down, BCP or DR or working remotely. But Paul, we never prepare for something societal happening across the whole market. So where all businesses are locked down and all service partners are locked down. So just your take on what you've observed of how organizations have changed since the COVID outbreak.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, Mike. I think most organizations of significant size and maturity would have had strong business continuity plans in place for one or even possibly two significant events, things like natural disasters or outbreaks. Even pandemic planning for anybody who has maybe Asian parts of their business would be something that would be fairly common. However, as you said, no one really anticipated a global issue other than maybe a recession, and no one expected a sustained issue. So most kind of business continuity planning is based around incidents that last a couple of days or weeks. We're now 4 to 6 weeks into lockdown, depending on what part of the world you're in, and with not necessarily any end in sight. So I think it's even for those who would have had some level of planning, none of them could have anticipated the level of disruption that we've seen. However, some organizations have still managed to adapt to this quite well. Like speaking in the micro level in CWSI, we were a mobile workforce anyway. Like a large majority of the staff would have worked remotely, and we would have ran the whole business remotely quite easily before on things like storms or snow days or elements like that. So, you know, in terms of our day-to-day ability to deliver services and do our jobs, we've been able to adapt to this quite easily. When you look at someone like HSBC, as Andy mentioned, you know, parts of the business probably were able to do this, but it's much harder to move all functions across. And that's where we're starting to see the real change, disruption, I think, is areas of businesses that previously would have been identified as not possible for digital transformation or not suitable or much further down the path have suddenly been accelerated. And it'll be very interesting to see if this is sustained after we get control of this COVID situation. I thought a simple example of that from my previous life in telco would have been call centers. You know, most planning for call centers was you lose your site, you move to a different site, but you still have your staff sitting at desks. In this scenario, what they've had to do is buy a load of laptops and use soft phones and have everyone actually running a call center from their home. And what's amazing is that's actually worked. And so it'd be very interesting to see what businesses like that will do once we're maybe go into a more stable situation.
Yeah, I think yes. I think Tom picked up on a piece there. You know, have we seen? And you mentioned there yourself about digital transformation. Tom touched on it too. Is this a time for acceleration? I just wonder, is it time for digital transformation over now? It's time for kind of digital survival. I think a lot of folk who maybe looked at digital transformation or remote working as part of digital transformation as a kind of a clip-on now becomes central. I think one of the short-term things we've been talking about on our previous webinars with CWSI is when BCP becomes BAU. You know, what do you do when this is today, you know, and how prepared you are for that. Very good. I've got one anecdotal story to share with you as and I share with our audience about how the world has changed for businesses that I think chimes to everything that you, Tom, Andy, and Paul just touched on. And it's we live in a rural part of Kildare, and I needed a new lawnmower. I needed a new electric mower, and the local builders merchant in Portarlington doesn't have a website, so they have just created though a Facebook page. So my wife Facebook paged the shop, who said they've got one in stock and will drop it over to the village tomorrow. Now that shop, I can tell you, when we come through all this, will definitely build its first website and will definitely have some form of e-commerce fulfillment. So I'm just wondering, are people going to look at the planning they currently got in place and kind of react to that and change differently to a whole realm of kind of socio-economic impact? So I think that's primed us brilliantly for our second question. In terms of changes implemented by organizations, how many of them are sustainable and built for long-term planning? So I think that kind of plays to the BCP BAU piece we touched on, and then how many of the things they've learned from this are sustainable. So, Andy, I'm going to turn to you first. There's quite a bit in this question here. So, in terms of changes that they implemented by organizations, the clients you were working, how many of them actually were looking at something beyond a week or 30 days or 60 days? Yeah, how, when you were sitting down solutioning for your clients, how much of this was long-term planning, and how much of it needs to be revisited?
Yeah, good question. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so communication like this, where there's more than one of us, a conference call type environment, whether it be audio or video, I think organisations have been embracing that type of technology for some time, and bringing clients into those types of conversations is normal. But I think the biggest change that is happening right now, and then obviously is going to make the biggest sustainable change for the future, is the potential that those types of conference calls will be the only, for the foreseeable future right now anyway, the only way for a group of people to get together. I only heard on the news earlier that large-scale gatherings could even be a lot later than the current lockdown timescales that we're talking about. So we may not be in a position to really be going to a world where we used to meet people quite regularly in a face-to-face or in a group, in a large presentation or a larger meeting. So it's really, how do organisations really embrace the tools and technology like this, where meaningful meetings can take place where nobody is present in the same location. And I think it's quite a shock to some. It's going to be familiar to some as well. And it's just really, how does that become the real normal accepted way of life, and how do we really make every one of those those meetings more and more meaningful?
And so I'm going to pick up the meeting piece, and I'm going to actually add to that, if I may, Andy, and turn to Tom and say, Tom, you know, when it's looking beyond meetings, when this is actually wholesale changing your business, to say actually now in this new paradigm, it's not simply just replicating what we would have done in the non-distancing world, or the days things were. That can't be. Are firms now, Tom, having to go revisit their workflow, revisit it, the onboarding and offboarding of staff? How do you do interviewing? It's just your sharing your thoughts and insights, and the readiness for long-term planning would be great.
Yeah, interesting angle on the question. Yeah, so I think the first thing we have to do is recognize, as the guy said, that there are very few people outside of maybe Bill Gates and Warren Buffett that could have predicted a pandemic like impacting the global economy like this this year, right? So most of our clients and most proper enterprise businesses like HSBC have really in-depth BCP plans in place, remote working capability for a percentage of users, but like the boy said, there's very little likelihood that anyone would have been ready for 100% lockdown. And so in a reactive situation, my view is that you have to adapt, and you have to do what you have to do to get your teams working. And that doesn't really matter if you're a business like Ditto or like CWSI, or if you're HSBC. In the short term, when productivity is the major driver, success might just be having the ability to transact. And that actually traverses all industries. So back to your anecdote, Mike, the win for your guy selling his lawnmowers is the fact that he actually found an ability to transact today, that he didn't have last week. And that one transaction is going to transform his business, because he will realize that he can now sell far more tractors and lawnmowers than he ever could before, using the power of Facebook. So I think for me, it all comes down to the communications challenge, right? And whether that's communicating with a customer in a digital fashion, you know, one-to-one over Facebook, or it's bringing people together on a Teams call. We all know Zoom's share price has doubled in the last month, no surprise. Now, a lot of these tools from a long-term, when I go to the long-term planning element here, a lot of these tools were on the roadmap for customers. And we speak to clients all day, every day at CWSI about how they're going to implement secure remote working, and obviously collaboration tools are central to that. We spoke with a customer last week. It's a FTSE 100 bank. They had Microsoft Teams on their roadmap for 2021, and they were just starting a proof of concept in February. And as of today, they have 60% of their workforce on it. So the ability to adapt and accelerate and change is very important at this time, right? And I think a lot of the clients, as I said, have accelerated that roadmap. And for some people, it could just be a case of, look, you have a mobile phone, don't you? Let's just get cracking. But coming back to the compliance point and long-term planning around that, is doing things like that in a reactive way can create serious risk for us all in the longer term. So how we're operating today is what we'll be judged on in the next 6 to 9 months, particularly as cracks start to appear. And from what we're seeing, as the dust starts to settle, more and more of our customers are coming to us and saying, look, we've reacted, we've got our teams up and running, and people have the right tools, they have the right technology, they have the right laptops, mobiles, tablets to actually transact with our customers. But are we doing this in the right way? Have we done enough to protect ourselves? And lastly, most importantly, from a compliance perspective, will our environment stand up to scrutiny from the regulator if something goes wrong? And for me, if the answer is no to any of those questions, you need to adapt and you need to start thinking long term.
I know we're going to explore that. That's a very good point you're making, Tom, on compliance. And next following questions, we'll double click on some of those issues. And thank you. And just turning to Paul on. So you're sitting down, Paul, experienced consultant. You know the tech. You work telco side. You know CWS side. You know, folk weren't coming planning, you know, that this would be a permanent change for the business. So, you know, at what point does this break and not become sustainable? You know, is one thing dropping off 50 laptops and saying, right, folks, there you go. And in terms of people re-skinning their strategy on the fly now, is that happening? Are folk doubling down now and saying, do you know what, to Andy's salient point that actually we could be locked down for a hell of a lot longer? Are people re-spinning up new strategies now while going through this now for much more long term?
I think it's almost too early to tell, but the certain organizations, as I said, the more mature, the ones who are more used to making these kind of plans, which would be your kind of pillar banks, your large global financial organizations, which would have had things like pandemic planning and that, are starting now to think, how do we deal with this in our risk register for the foreseeable future? I don't think anyone has any evidence that this is going to be a once-off. All the information that we seem to have at the moment is pointing towards a continuous rolling spike of maybe not full global lockdown, but regional lockdowns in either country or in country over anything for the foreseeable future, potentially. So I think every organization now is being forced to think of not specific event responses, but how can we be flexible? So flexibility, I think, is the ultimate element of any strategy right now, is how can we make our business more flexible so that we can react to situations like this that can happen so quickly and have such a large impact. So I think there will be a big focus now on flexibility, which in turn leads to the conversation around, obviously around mobile technologies, cloud technologies, but also around the flexibility of your work practices, of how your business actually services its customers and services itself. So all elements, all workflows are up for grabs, I think, at the moment, because a lot of the impacts from this kind of event are not the obvious ones. You know, we've spoken about things like dealing with a call center or being able to maintain transactions, and then you've hinted at other things like how do we do hiring and firing. There's all elements of a business could be affected here and need to be looked at. And I think that's something that's only going to start now, but will be accelerated over the next period. And the focus will have to be on how do we build enough capacity and resilience into our business that if these events happen in the future, that we can react to them quickly.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd also have to say, just to share with you, I've noticed it now, CWSI and Movius are hugely, highly relevant, the products and services you provide in before COVID, but particularly through COVID. You know, it is completely relevant that you should be offering your services and explain to folk the benefits of using your products and tools and solutions. Are hugely relevant. But I think there's clearly a challenge that some businesses are. Ambulance chasing is the wrong word, but getting the right tone of voice of selling stuff, I think, has been difficult too. And I don't know if we've all probably seen the certain LinkedIn posts of people promoting their products and services that are kind of very tenuous linked to COVID, but maybe trying to exploit the situation. Also, other businesses are trying to figure out how they can get back in selling again. Are people buying? Is it the appropriate time to do these things? So I think what's going to be interesting, if we are going to see this longer term shift to this lockdown, is that commerce is going to have to shift to a different way of doing business, that maybe you're not always going to get in a room together. Maybe shareholder, Bill Gates wrote a great piece I read yesterday about shareholders meetings being digital and how they've moved everything digital. So I think there's some cultural things going to change here too, and I think they'll come soon. Really, I think if not here already, I think certainly if this continues. Very good, excellent. Okay, I think it's time for our third question, and this is Tom touched on earlier about compliance, and I think how do these changes in these issues arising these affect the compliance of firms in highly regulated spaces. So I think I'd like to ask this question in two ways. One, how do these changes we've seen in work practice and how individual firms are embracing those and ensure they're compliant? But I guess also how does regulators or how the other folk, are going to manage and market the behavior and adherence of these firms in these days. So, Andy, I'm going to start with you. How do these changes and the issues arising from them affect the compliance of firms in highly regulated spaces? So, what's your perception on how firms are making sure they're compliant and putting in place the mechanisms to show that they are adhering to these compliant issues in highly regulated firms?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So when the pandemic first surfaced, we in Movius we started to look and be made aware really of announcements from various regulators around some of the key trading locations across the world, and the general theme was there was an obvious understanding that things needed to change, but an underlying message from each of the regulators that each of those firms must remain fully compliant in the day-to-day working that they did prior, in exactly the same way as they did prior to the pandemic. And that's quite a strong message. In many, sometimes it was actually worded quite nicely and politely, but the message itself was still exactly the same. It was still saying, whatever you do, you've got to carry on as you were from a compliance perspective. And I think that probably worried a few firms, as they were already having to look at how to keep the lights on, shore up the firm, and mobilise whilst maintaining a duty of care for each and every one of their staff. So from our perspective, we've been working with each of these firms in ensuring that all of there's at least a mobile recorded line. So when I say mobile, a recorded line, so any business transaction with a customer or a client is still managed to be recorded and logged in the very same way that it was previously when they were in the office. I'd seen also some articles within the New York Times around some firms resorting to pen and paper. Do what you need to do, I think, in some cases, but absolutely that would have been a very, very tactical one-day response to something that hopefully they got over pretty quickly, and looked at how the use of a recorded line is absolutely critical in a time like this. Hopefully not, but who knows, in the future, in a year's time, if the need for information relating to a trade needs to be reconstructed, how would you recreate that from a piece of paper? It'd be extremely difficult, wouldn't it? But giving them the capability to have the recorded line on the mobile, to either on-premise recorded infrastructure that they had previously, or to cloud-based storage, they've still got the capability to retrieve that recording in the future as part of that trade reconstruction. We take away, or try and think about taking away, some of that pain, whilst IT teams, compliance teams, risk teams were running around, and still probably are running around, trying to ensure that their business runs and continues to run as smooth as it did.
Yes, and I guess compliance is there to protect the individual employee, the company, the shareholders in the marketplace. And that's why we have these good codes of conduct. And it's been shocking for me, folks, just the spike we've seen in fraudulent behavior, from kind of low-level stuff on Facebook, right up to the spoofing of websites for selling PPE protective equipment. I don't know if anyone saw that, but it was a shocking pan-European fraud. So do you see the regulators, Andy, coming back in and monitoring this much more closely now. There's been a huge volatility in pricing, so this is ripe for abuse by people who want to abuse the system.
It really is. I didn't really want to say it, but you're absolutely right. This is prime time, isn't it, for any kind of misuse or abuse, if somebody is given the opportunity or sees the need, and that's the worst part around the need. And obviously with market volatility, it kind of just push it in that direction. So yeah, ensuring compliance is there for your firm is absolutely paramount, and the regulators, yes, at the moment, I'm sure they're in the same position as everybody else, just ensuring that the ship is still sailing. But as time goes on, continue in this position, they're going to start to really come down a little bit more kind of harder. I would have thought.
So Tom, I know you've got specific insights you want to share with our audience on this particular issue of compliance and regulation and auditing and control. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this question, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. For me, I know you've framed the question in two tranches there. I think the latter part is probably, for me, the most important part. And I'd suggest the key question here is how will the regulator react to the current situation? And that is really what should drive how firms operate. Because if the regulator, as Andy has said, has come out and said in the statement in March that the expectation is that companies maintain their compliance regulatory position, they've no objection. They've no objection to firms working from home or doing any activities from backup sites, etc. But they're still applying the same level of standards to the compliance element. So, like in simple terms, if I'm a compliance professional, it means I have to manage the same pressures that I was managing 2 months ago, but with a totally new working environment and without any control of those end users that are out there in those regulated entities. So it's a serious challenge. I think back to, like, as the world shut down and we all went into lockdown, as I said, maintaining productivity was the main driver for most businesses, just getting people up and running, make sure they could transact. IT have gone off and enabled some great new collaboration tools, or you've decided that mobile is the new BCP plan. But as a regulated entity and as a compliance professional, you have to consider how all of these channels, whether they're existing or brand new, are being recorded. And to Andy's point around trade reconstruction, it's absolutely critical that, again, from compliance's side, that they're able to track every single interaction that a trader has with their customer, to go and prove that there was no untoward behavior happening. And I think, to your point, Mike, absolutely, like, criminals love a crisis. So from a security perspective, these guys are trying to access your system all day, every day, regardless of COVID. And what COVID has brought is uncertainty, opportunity to go and spoof passwords, create new websites, phishing links, and people operating in an uncertain environment are much more likely to click on those types of links. So your credentials are much more at risk. But I think Paul Connerty could probably add quite a bit on the security aspect. But the final piece I would say about the regulator is, from a compliance perspective, again, will they apply mitigating circumstances if something happens from a compliance standpoint over the next couple of months? I think the reality is, if you do nothing, then they're not going to give you any mitigation. But if you do something and you're seen to make an effort, you're reacting and you're trying your best to record those transactions and put yourselves into a compliant position, then it's likely that the regulator will give you some mitigating thoughts if something goes wrong.
Yeah, I think so. I guess it's as you talked about, market manipulation, fraudulent behavior, KYC, AML. There's so many things happening now. I was speaking, folks, to a client yesterday, and they're in the commodities and trading space, and they had to switch part of their business to taking order flow via emails. So it's astonishing. The return to emails coming in, saying them the metals that they wanted to buy and sell and place orders via email. So Paul, I think to you, just your perspective on the security aspect of this would be great to share with our audience.
Yeah, I think the guys have covered off an awful lot of this. I think there's no evidence that we have at the moment that the regulator is going to be in any way majorly lenient. Historically, that wouldn't be the position of a regulator. So you have to assume that what you did before, as Tom said, is what you have to do in this new normal. So there's a number of areas around security that you have to factor in there. So previously, even at a simple level, you had visibility of your staff. You had, like if we maybe park a trader example, a more simple example would be a call center taking credit card payments where they have to be PCI compliant. And in that kind of environment, typically you would have no ability to record information, no pen, paper in the office, and quite strong managerial oversight. For that new world, you might have had to change that completely. Those people could be working from home now, or you might have actually completely moved to a Stripe or some other kind of model. So your operating model there, everything that you've done previously in terms of what you were audited on and your business processes will likely have had to change, and that introduces risk. Any kind of a change that's done in a hurry always exponentially increases the risk. So that has to be managed. I think it will be also interesting though is the flip side, because the auditors themselves are not going to be able to audit businesses as easily as they would have done previously. They're not going to be able to go on site necessarily and see what's really going on. They're going to be much more reliant on digital records. So that's going to be quite interesting now for businesses in terms of how they produce and store and can share those records and produce them. So I think having tools that give much better recording, logging, type and telemetry, which is easy to search and locate and give over to a regulator, is going to be of benefit to organizations in the future over and above maybe more traditional systems. I also think there's some interesting stuff that has to be factored in here as well. Of we're not just talking about compliance to primarily financial regulators. We also have to consider GDPR in this conversation as well, privacy regulation. So there can also be some fallout in the rush to work remotely, to change how we do our work practices, of accidentally harvesting extra information about your employees or your customers. And then you need to factor that in. Privacy by design is still a core tenet of GDPR. And so if you change your business processes or move to new platforms or systems, you still have to have that privacy by design conversation. You still have to document that. You still have to think about, are we introducing any new risks here, and do we have to communicate that to our customers or to our staff, and how are we going to handle that? So there's a number of different elements that compliance touches on other than just the regulator. There's a lot of things you have to be compliant to. You have to be compliant to things like working time acts, which can be quite tricky in organizations where you don't have good control over how people are accessing systems from home, where they're maybe not switching off or getting good breaks and stuff like that. So I think it's a very broad conversation around compliance. I think that we obviously have a slightly narrower focus here today, primarily around the financial elements, but businesses have a lot of areas to balance on this.
I think too. I mean, it's just on kind of financial compliance too. We were I was in a meeting with ING yesterday, and we're doing some work with the folks in Amsterdam. And ING made a bank-wide decision to relax the limit on tap and go payments, to increase it so people could pay more tap and go. And it had a tremendously positive effect because people weren't handling euros and everything was, But there's things like that. Change has been implemented and calibrated, that firms are adapting to this new way of doing business with each other, trying to remain compliant, but also trying to kind of ease things a bit on folk. I think Tom mentioned at the top of this stuff there about the employee duty of care, pieces too are extremely important. And I think also how they're going to handle the onboarding and offboarding of people. I find that a fascinating thing on compliance, because we know that for regulated firms, that's a hell of an issue, So when folk are coming off the platform, as it were, how do you make sure that that's handled with a duty of care to the employee and to the firm? So yeah, indeed, very good. Okay, next question, please. And how can firms sustain these changes in the long term and future-proof operations? So this is a great question, but I think there's two pieces to this here. How can firms sustain these changes in the long term and future-proof operations? So I'm keen to get. I'm going to stay with you, Paul, and get your perspective first, just from a strategy and consulting perspective. When you're sitting down advising your clients now, how long is long term, and how future-proof is future-proof, Paul?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's been kind of touched around in a few of the earlier conversations. But for me, the advice that I would be giving my clients now is that you must assume that this is not a one-off event. So this is not something that we can do a band-aid change for. That may be what we've implemented right now just to get us over the hump, but we really need to be thinking that this is going to be part of the landscape of doing business for the future. So there's no way on earth that this can't be a long-term, or the solutions or tooling that we decide on or strategies that we decide on cannot be long-term. And that's the only way we're going to future-proof our operations. So there's a couple of areas that I'd be looking to get businesses to really focus on, is looking at what you have implemented in the short term to see, is this something that is just short term? Like, is this sustainable? Can we keep this going, or is there a better way that we could be doing this? And could we maybe transition or move forward our plans around digital transformation a bit more? So maybe instead of just pushing out a laptops, maybe we look at that actual entire workflow and see if there's a better way of doing it. So your example of the very simple example of the guy with the Facebook, he's never had to think about it before. He's probably realistically going to be looking at going, well, look, there's a very good reason for me to maintain an online presence and having an online sales channel. This should be part of my strategy in the future. And also he's probably looking at other areas around, how do I securely deliver, my products to my customers, and how do I build relationships, and maybe this is an opportunity for me to expand my organization. Maybe I can deliver countrywide instead of to my local area because I'm now an online presence, etc. So there's going to be quite a few interesting conversations, I think, to say, well, what have we actually done? Is that a sustainable option, or do we need to look at that differently? But I don't think there's anyone who'll be thinking, once this is over, we're just going to revert back to normal. I think that would be incredibly short-sighted of any organization, and any organization that is thinking that way, I think strategically are in trouble.
So just to recap, there is, what are they doing in the short term? How can that be scaled up if you're looking at accelerating digital transformation, and then fundamentally the workflow of your business and in your operations? Because if this is not going away anytime soon, this is long term. This is the future-proof your organization is to fundamentally, as you say, accelerate your digital transformation. So I'd like to turn to Andy with the same question from a Movius perspective.
Sure, man.
This, how are firms looking to change long term?
Yeah, from a Movius perspective, by the way, could you guys hear me? Because my connection dropped. Absolute perfect timing to talking about home working.
I was going to say living proof of the times we're living in.
Exactly right. Exactly. So yeah, I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently, if I may, because as I was reading it and Paul was talking, it kind of struck me that I wonder if there may well be a little bit of a mini revolution around software development off the back of this, from a sustainability perspective. From obviously the shift of everybody moving to working from mobile devices, working out of the office. I presume the future will be between home and office. Whether or not there'll be the revolution around what is developed will be a much lighter output from the application perspective. I think a lot of software providers, whether they be in-house, some of the larger firms, or off-the-shelf products, have been guilty in the past of being probably over-engineered slightly. They would have 3 or 4 key features that absolutely are critical, and maybe a handful that were just kind of nice to haves, and they'll just throw them on the side, and that was the over-engineered part. But with the now shift to everybody going to be working from a mobile device, as I can pretty much see going forward, whether that will be in the office or out of the office, the need for a really heavy consuming product on a device, that's just going to consume all resources on a device. Well, really, there's going to be a need for 10, 11 different applications to all run off the one device, and that may even be a mobile phone. So the real shift, as I see, maybe it's a bit of hope there for me, but yeah, as I see it, there may well be a real revolution around how some of these products are developed. They're developed purely, probably mobile first now, as opposed to desktop first as they've been in the past, and then the mobile offering being almost an afterthought. If that's the case, then absolutely fantastic. We're going to be moving really in the right direction for a lot of businesses that are going to be moving to a mobile first way of working. they also really need the applications to move with it.
Yeah, I think it plays true to the very salient point Paul made earlier about data and GDPR and data sharing. So your perspective here is actually this insatiable appetite for software. Maybe there'll be a different software delivery mechanism. It'll be a bit skinnier, a bit more mobile first, and see a plethora of this kind of developments happening. Yeah,
real reliant on cloud now. Thankfully, that we are already there in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Different applications, but now more than ever, all data is pretty much being cloud-based. So yeah, there's a huge reliance upon that, and ensuring that stays sustainable, and firms really embrace that going forward.
Oh yeah, look, if you're trying to get into your data center to do stuff, you're in trouble, aren't you? So
Exactly.
no, I think you're right. Move to the sky to make things fly. So I completely agree on the power of cloud. Very good. So Tom, just turning to you for your thoughts on sustaining these changes in long term and future proofing operations. What would you like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think you touched on this earlier, Mike. I'm not a technical person, so from my perspective, it's all about company culture. And I think the most important thing I can think of now as a manager is how do you keep your employees engaged and how do you keep your clients happy? In a world where you can't go shake hands, bring people for lunch, go for a pint, and do the usual thing that we've all taken for granted for years and years, I think we need to reimagine productivity and think about how people can get their jobs done in a way that's good for the business, but that's also good for them. I think if you foster that type of culture, you're going to future-proof the operation because people are going to give you the right feedback, and you're going to start to get that 360 view of what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. And from my point of view, I really think I look back at the 2008 crisis, and I look at some of the companies that fell away and some of the companies that excelled. And I think strong leadership, decisive leadership at this point in time, helping your staff to adapt and take on new challenges and embrace a kind of a culture of change is what will give people a competitive edge. And what I really like about that is when you think about crisis, right? Like crisis comes along pretty much in cycles, right? We see them every decade. There's something, right? .com bubble, the credit crunch. Now we have COVID-19. Now they're all based on different fundamentals, but at the same time, there are fundamental changes to how business operates. And I think if you embrace that culture of change, you then set yourselves up to be resilient for when it comes down the tracks, which is inevitable.
Yeah, I'd like to dwell on that. That's a great response, guys. Everyone, thank you, Tom. I'd like to dwell on that for you, Tom. Just, it's funny. I'm sure you've done the same thing. I've been in more meetings in the last month where I've seen living rooms, kitchens, offices, spare bedrooms, even a garden or two now that the weather is better. And it very much felt like with the clients in the business that we operated in, which is kind of emerging tech and fintech and big blue chip firms and stuff, it became very human, I think. It felt like they were all in it together type thing.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a very profound cultural change. And I put it to a bank that we're working with that before, if I couldn't email my bank, I would think, Jeannie Mac, they're behind the times. I can't even email my banking advisor. But I think there'll be a thing now that if you can't video conference, if you can't video call someone that's handling your account or someone that's doing something, I think that will I think that form of digital transformation and connectivity is going to be accelerated now. I think that's some of the long-term cultural things. And I think customer expectations, isn't it? I think I'm just, I think it'll be interesting to see how that goes. If you just look at the share price of these companies, it's off the hook.
Well, the customer, Mike, I think from my perspective, when I look at that, I think the customer will go where it's easiest to do business. So particularly in these kind of larger volume plays, like in banking and things like that. So if I have to have a current account or I have to have a mortgage, if I'm not likely to go to the place to get my mortgage if I can't do the video call and make a seamless kind of process. If you make it harder for me, I'll go somewhere else.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's absolutely true. And I think before there was this idea with digital transformation, and I know particularly for the financial institutions that we're talking to here or regulated companies, that digital transformation actually meant servicing smaller wallet folk in a robo-advisor way, for example, or having some kind of mobile app that was self-service. But actually, I think what's happened with the way we're looking at digital transformation now, with the communication tools that Movius and CWSI are championing, it's actually quite high touch and very personal. Things like a call, speaking to someone, it's video conferencing someone, but in a secure way. No, I love it. I can't believe we're on to our last question. Question number 5, please, which is our 5 top tips. So now I've got my own top tip for this, which I'll share at the end. But as I've been thinking about this question, but what would be the top 5 pieces of advice you would give to organizations today? Now, I think what I'm going to do is we'll do one at a time, going around in a circle. How does that sound, guys? And then we can chat about those pieces of advice. So I'm going to stay with you, Tom. What would be the singular top piece of advice you would give organizations today? And I think we focused today about compliance and regulation and communication and those kind of things. So you can touch on that, but you can make it broader too, if that suits you as well, Tom.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for me, it goes back to one of my favorite quotes. It's that the big don't eat the small, the fast eat the slow. My piece of advice to any organization right now would be to make decisions quickly and be decisive in terms of leadership, because if the longer you wait to put the right processes in place, the more likely it is your customers are going to go buy from someone else. And that would be my key point.
So be decisive, make decisions quickly. Very good. Perfect being the enemy of good, and you sometimes just need good, right? So yeah, love it. Very good. I'm now going to turn to Andy. A sage piece of advice from yourself, Andy.
Okay. Yeah, my advice would be to compliance teams in firms, and that's to embrace this technology change that's being forced upon us. I think the biggest thing that has probably been their challenge for some time is actually going to do this. Don't revert back.
Andy, I think you're part of England needs another satellite dish. Hopefully I will stay in line. Andy, are you there? You're back. You're dipping in and dipping in.
Yeah, I think you'll move to Paul just in case, I think.
We'll come back. Save that, Andy. We'll be back in a minute. Paul, a piece of advice you'd like to share? Because I'm going to go around a couple of times in this advice stuff, guys. So next piece of advice, Paul, that you'd like to share with our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's the consultant's mantra, really. For me, is my advice to business is always focus on the outcome. So rather than focusing on how things were done, focus on why things are being done. So both in terms of what you're trying to achieve in your business processes, because it will help you realign them and change them if you need to, but also, as is already touched on, I think in how you manage staff. I think managing your own staff in a distributed way requires a much stronger management style, and one which is more based on trust. So you really have to focus on what's the outcome we're all trying to achieve in this team, and make sure that people are aligned to that, and not be worrying about how long people are spending sitting in front of their computer every day at home in their house. So I think focusing on the outcomes for the business and in turn for your own staff is going to be key to navigate this.
Love it. Very good. Andy, you're still with us. I'm going to go back to you. And you touched on fines, please, embracing the change.
I'm going to change my message though, Mike, if it's okay.
Yes,
to be for firms to consider dedicated broadband lines for their traders if they have them working from home. Something that we used to have many years ago, and yeah, all the more relevant from me just dropping a couple of moments ago. But yeah, joking aside, there's a lot of throughput needed on devices today. Obviously, everything they're trying to do in a home working environment, so lessening that workload as much as possible, move it to a mobile device, move it to a GSM signal rather than over data, reduce the consumption on the devices that are being used, like a laptop and everything, and obviously stable broadband connections.
I love it. I think just to add my own piece into this, and piece of advice, if I may, I would say to firms out there, and it's building on everything that you've touched on, Tom, Andy, and Paul, in our chat so far, the piece of advice I would probably give firms is to ask themselves the following question: can I serve my current book of business and my current clients in this environment for the next 30, 60, 90 days? And can I win new business and serve new clients in the next 30, 60, 90 days in this current mode of operation? And if the answer to either of those questions is no, then don't wait. I think, act on it now, put in place the solutions you need that you can serve your existing customer base and you can win new customers. There's no point waiting 30, 60, 90 days. I think we're here for the long term. Very good. Excellent. Now, I've just seen the time that we're coming up to, and I've really enjoyed this session. I think it's been absolutely superb. But I wanted to return to each of our guests and to invite each of you to share if there was one thing you wanted the audience to take away from our talk today, and one thing you just wanted to revisit and remind folk, what would that be? And I'm going to start with you, Paul.
Okay, yeah, sure. So I think the key one for me really as a takeaway is going back to maybe question 4 about sustaining this. So I think the piece around analysing what you've implemented. So I think really if businesses really look at what they've had to put in the short term now, and then focusing on the outcome of the purpose of the business, of the purpose of those workflows, and looking and seeing if what they've put in is sufficient or whether they need to put something else in. I think that's the medium term most important thing that needs to be done. So the short term was to implement something. The medium term needs to be an analysis of whether that something is good enough or needs to be better, so that you could then make the long term planning. So I think if I was leaving anybody with one thought, that would be the next area for business to focus on if they're lifting their heads up from recovering from rolling out thousands of laptops or whatever else they've implemented in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. And the same question to Andy. One thing you'd like to remind our audience about or share, just to double down on, what would it be?
I think with me looking at this from a recording perspective in my previous roles, and within Movius, and one of its key features being compliance recording, it'd be amiss of me to not use the message where we were talking around compliance now, regulator messages today, not changing to what they were previously. It is really just do what you can to remain compliant. It would be a terrible situation that in a year's time there was a fine coming your way for something that was unfortunately outside of your control today. We're already in a awkward enough situation, so we wouldn't want to be obviously asking for that as well in a year's time. So yeah, remaining compliant, recorded lines, I think, where possible, for any compliant transactions that need it.
Yes, very salient, very sage advice. Very good. So, Tom, I'd like for you to conclude on this particular section here. What would be your piece of advice? The one thing from today, the one thing that we covered that you'd like to kind of revisit and re-emphasize for our audience.
Yeah, I think importantly for me, everyone is going through a similar phase. I think that the tools exist is probably the most important thing to understand. So while we've been forced into this new environment, the tools exist to drive optimized connectivity, collaboration, video, calling, UC, mobile, recording. All of those channels is capable today. You can get that ability immediately, and you can apply the right compliance tools to ensure that your operation is functioning both productively and in a compliant fashion. So everything is there to support you. It's a great opportunity to get ahead of the game if you really sit down and take it by the horns and create a competitive edge. Because as we've all said, this is not going to be a once-off, and there's more to come. So doing something now is probably the best piece of advice I could give.
No, very good. Excellent. Well, look, guys, I know you are passionate technologists, and I know, folks, please do reach out to Andy, Tom, and Paul. Their inbox is always open. You can look them up on LinkedIn, drop the guys an email. I can't believe we've been chatting here for an hour. There's all the digits on the slides there, folk. But it's been a real pleasure. Yeah, I think, look, make decisions quickly, be decisive for compliance teams, embrace the change, and then really kind of look at these outcomes that you want and plan for the long term. So fantastic. So look, so many thanks to our panel for sharing your insights, and to CWSI for bringing this event to market. To find out more about CWSI and their secure remote working resources, please visit CWSIsecurity.com. And to find out more about Movius, you can visit moviuscore.com. This session has been recorded, and a link to the video will be shared via email shortly. For more great remote working insights, and be sure to tune in next Thursday, April 23rd, for the next webinar on managing connectivity and productivity issues. For more information or discuss any topics covered, please do get in touch with CWSI at the details listed there, or check out our secure remote working hub the digits there. Until then, just to say thank you very much. And guys, thank you very much. I can't believe that's been an hour. It's gone very quickly, hasn't it?
Thanks, Mike. Cheers, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It's been really super. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks, Mike.
Well, be safe, guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Bye.
Tom Kennedy.